Have you ever heard a creationist ask, if humans evolved from monkeys, then why are there still monkeys? Sure, you could respond and say that's not at all how it works, and how we didn't come from them, but we have a common ancestor. And you could try to explain how anyone asking that question clearly doesn't understand the concept of evolution, because no scientist would ever say we evolved from monkeys. Or you could just do what I do and just walk away because that person isn't worth your time. Now, imagine someone asking an even more ignorant question, then basically dropping a mic on camera because he thinks he just nailed every scientist. That is what I saw, and I can't let it go. And I can't walk away. It really is the most embarrassing video about creationism that I've ever seen. And I have to talk about it. And since no one in my house cares to hear me talk about it, you have to listen to me. Okay, how embarrassing is it? You know the infamous video where Ray Comfort says a banana is an atheist's worst nightmare because it's yellow and curvy and therefore proof of God's creation, even though the type of banana he's holding up in the video is quite literally the product of evolution and selection? Yeah, well, this is worse than that. It is so embarrassing that the creationist in question took down the video from YouTube because maybe even he recognized how dumb it was. But I figured he was gonna do that, so I saved a copy just for you. And I'll show you the key part in a second, but you need to know who's doing the talking. It's Matt Powell, a creationist who pretty much exists in order to make atheists look good. He's one of those guys who proves that a little bit of knowledge can be a very dangerous thing. Because he doesn't understand evolution, and he doesn't understand science, and he doesn't understand why people are atheists, but he's entirely convinced he's the smartest guy in the room on all of these subjects. So when he talks about evolution, for example, he does it with the air of authority, even though he has none. This is a guy who once said it was a historical fact that pterodactyls were killed during the Civil War because he saw a picture that was staged for a TV show.
I believe if we study history, the Confederates were able to shoot pterodactyls, back in the Civil War, and they spread these things out. Anybody can look it up online. They spread these things out. And this is a historical fact.
This is a guy who once said, and I quote, 99% of school shootings are done by atheists.
Is that why 99% of school shootings are done by atheists?
That's right. That's good.
But yet Christians have their minds poisoned, yet Christians have never committed such an act?
He made that up. That's not even close to being true. He lied. He also said that dinosaurs farted themselves into extinction after the Civil War, apparently.
Evolution actually teaches that certain of the dinosaurs went extinct because they farted themselves into extinction.
Anyway, with all that in mind, Matt Powell now wants to prove evolution is the most racist religion in the world. And his proof is that people in Africa still exist. I kid you not, that is his entire argument. And that would be bad enough, except he still found a way to make it worse. I'm just gonna play you about 20 seconds of this video, but it is more than enough. See if you can find all the mistakes.
Evolution should just flat out be canceled just based on the fact that it's totally based in racism. If it's about survival of the fittest and we evolved from African Americans into other Americans, what about the African Americans that are still alive today? That is completely dissing on them. That is completely racist towards them.
Okay, so let's see if I have this right. He says evolution promotes survival of the fittest. First, that's not even a Darwin original. Someone else came up with that phrase. But whatever the case, evolution is an explanation of how living things came to be, not a prescription for what anyone ought to do. Evolution doesn't promote genocide any more than the existence of genes promotes eugenics. It's a dumb thing to say, but not quite as dumb as saying we evolved from African Americans. First of all, who knew our ancient ancestors were Americans millions of years before the United States ever existed? Here's what I assume happened. Powell has heard that our distant ancestors are from Africa, but he thinks calling them African might be politically incorrect, so he changed the word to African American, never thinking through what that means. For the record, our human ancestors are from Africa. They are African, not African American, and it is not weird to say that. Then Powell says there are now other Americans. Not quite. Not everyone who eventually left Africa became an American. Some are European, or Australian, or Indian. But let's say he just screwed up the wording. Maybe you let that slide, except he still implies that other Americans are more evolved, which we are not. And no scientist is saying that. He also implies we are all different species. The fact that there are now people on other continents does not mean we are, different forms of life incapable of interbreeding. That's not how anything works. Powell may be stupid, but he's also really stupid. Then he says there are still African Americans alive today, which is true, kind of. I mean, there are Africans alive today, except he thinks the idea of evolution dismisses that, which, again, no. People move or are taken away from their home against their will. It happens all the time throughout history. The fact that people still live in places our shared ancestors used to live doesn't mean evolution is broken or that we are a separate species. Seriously, I am almost impressed by how much ignorance he packs into that short clip. Matt Powell put all of his dumbest ideas in a blender and came out with racism. It's not just wrong, it's more proof that he doesn't understand the very basics of the theory he's dedicated his life to challenging. Meanwhile, he's a conservative Christian who presumably votes for politicians who actively support actual racist policies. Look, there are undoubtedly scientists, past and present, who have promoted bad ideas, including racism. They deserve to be called out on it. But even if someone like Darwin was racist, certainly by the standards of our time, it doesn't mean the underlying theory of evolution was wrong. A creationist is always going to have a hard time debunking evolution, because creationism itself is a myth, and evolution has been confirmed in so many different ways many times over. But the very least a creationist could do if he's trying to discredit evolution is understand what it actually says. So he's debunking something people actually accept as true. But, that might require reading a second book. I don't think Matt Powell is willing to do that. The whole video has the intellectual vibe of someone asking, if adults evolved from babies, then why are there still babies? Checkmate. Only worse because his conclusion is racism. By the way, none of this even gets into his claim that evolution is a religion. It's not. There's no God. No one is asking anyone to accept it blindly. There's plenty of evidence confirming the theory, and scientists are not demanding that you give them 10% of your income. I mean, they'll take it, but they're not demanding it. But I do appreciate it whenever religious people use religion as a pejorative to describe anything they don't like. They don't even realize it's a self-own. Anyway, if Powell wants to sound smarter in a future video, he could try learning about the things he's talking about, or talk to a scientist instead of delivering these monologues. Or I guess he could just, not record any audio. Just sit there in silence. That would be smarter than the stuff he's putting out right now.